When evaluating artwork, what matters more? The intent of the artist making the work, or the interpretation of people who view it? This conundrum has no clear answer, though it brings an interesting discussion on the subject of the interpretation of artwork. This discourse is most present with the floral paintings of Georgia O'Keeffe and the interpretations that spawned from them. Georgia O'Keeffe was an American painter well known for her various modern works. Among her most popular pieces are the floral paintings that were created around the 1920s. For many of these paintings, O'Keeffe's intent in their creation was to show an everyday piece of scenery, such as a flower in an expanded view, bringing a form of excitement to the viewer akin to her experience in New York City, seeing many of the towering skyscrapers. Many of these paintings featured a kind of dynamism that inspired movement. In the words of Schumann, nothing in an O'Keeffe's still life is at rest, everything moves. Her use of color, too, showed an almost explosive quality in her artwork. The works were made, according to O'Keeffe, to force people to sit up and take notice of nature. In her life as an artist, O'Keeffe often wanted to disengage from the popular view of herself as a woman artist, removing the notion of her own sex from her title as an artist. O'Keeffe held to believe that the label of a woman artist limited the expressive quality of her work, that the discrimination that came along with being a woman would lower the expectation of her own artwork. She, in essence, saw herself as no different than a male artist. Despite the intent she may have had in creating the floral paintings, the prevailing interpretation of them was not what she desired. Many of the people that were exposed to her artwork took favor to the feminist interpretation that the paintings were representational of female genitalia. A vast collection of her paintings were viewed as sexual in nature and reflected in how people saw her as an artist. Now, O'Keeffe did not detest feminism. As a matter of fact, she herself supported feminist movements. This is made apparent from her participation at the 1926 dinner held in Washington, D.C., in honor of Jessie Dell, and to her admonishment of Eleanor Roosevelt in 1944 for not supporting the equal rights movement. She did not reject feminism itself, but rather the feminist interpretation of her artwork that ultimately disregarded her intent as an artist. Many of the feminist views of O'Keeffe's work originated from the publicity that came from Alfred Stieglitz. The first exposure came with her charcoal drawing, Special No. 9, where he immediately noted the work as an extraordinary piece of woman artwork, noting things such as her being an unusual woman and being bigger than most women. O'Keeffe, at first, detested his interpretation of her artwork, until he offered her an exclusive exhibition in 1917. Despite her protests to the belittling interpretation of her artwork, the exhibitions brought O'Keeffe much-needed publicity to support her career. Stieglitz's reputation in the world of art brought many eyes to O'Keeffe. Ultimately, the success of O'Keeffe's artwork would not be without its Stieglitz's exhibitions, and so, despite her protests to the sexualized interpretations of her artwork, she recognized the publicity of such to be paramount to her success. And such, she accepted the interpretation of her artwork. In the words of Linda Grasso, feminism is the greatest unacknowledged factor in O'Keeffe's success story. The sexualized exposure of O'Keeffe and her work continued with Stieglitz's photo shoots that featured O'Keeffe in various sexualized positions along with her artwork. Many of these exhibitions further pushed the feminist interpretation of O'Keeffe and her artwork, but kept giving her the publicity that brought her success. So, she continued. So, with the understanding that the feminist view of O'Keeffe's artwork was ultimately belittling to her mission as an artist, can the interpretation still be considered a valid viewpoint? Ultimately, it should be understood that an artist has little control over how others will interpret their work. Some may be able to push a view more than others, But ultimately, interpretation lies in the minds of viewers. O'Keeffe's status as a woman held a substantial weight in the eyes of many at the time, belittling as it may have been. As art progresses and becomes more modern, it becomes more substantial in its conceptual nature, and the need for various methodologies to interpret the nature of various works increases. No longer is any single interpretation for an artwork seen as the uncontested truth. For a time, the sexualized feminist interpretation held as much value as the interpretation that lined up with O'Keeffe's intent, and thus holds a permanent place in how she is viewed as an artist. In the words of Grasso, feminism is an enduring influence on O'Keeffe's legacy. Whether the artist is considered an insider or an outsider, a supporter or a detractor, she and feminism are inextricably entwined.